Hello, everybody. Scott Golden here with the Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling Review Series 1983 is where we begin. January 1st of 83, oddly enough. And we kind of move forward into a new year. We've got all of 82 that was available on the network. I think there's 48 of those. About maybe half a dozen or so of the other 1981. And 44 of the 52 weeks in 1983 are here. We open with Paul Jones and the One Man Gang versus Valiant and Rotundo. Useful information here is that Rotundo, on Christmas night, apparently, as we're told by Bob Caudle, terribly underrated. If you're not familiar with Caudle because he's a generation before you or whatever, worth going out of your way to listen to some of his stuff. He's so understated, so underrated. And but Jones and the One Man Gang here, gang having hair, which is interesting. He doesn't lose his hair until he gets to world class later in '83. But anyway, Gang and takes over on Rotundo. Rotundo is your Mid Atlantic Television champion at the time, and Paul Jones is a former multi-time Mid Atlantic champion. Interesting thing to see. I mean, it's definitely something where you really want to begin to get to kind of look at Rotundo a bit differently because he has been probably one of the most steady pushed in the last 4 6 months, something like that. And he comes around. Jimmy Valiant endorsing Mike Rotundo. Valiant and the One Man Gang do a series of house show runs here in 1983, which I find interesting just because you wouldn't imagine that they would be terribly good opponents. But Valiant comes off the ropes, does a lot of punch, kick, basic stuff, nothing necessarily to write home about, but the crowd's behind him, even here in the studio, and I can imagine at the main event area is also the thing. Valiant goes to the floor, starts brawling with Jones. Jones Army, his thing with Jones Army continues through 85, 86, 87. Good gosh. But Jimmy is here for a good bit of time. Interesting that Jimmy never went back to the WWF in the later, Attitude Era. Just interesting that he always remained either Southern or in the Crockett area in general. But anyway, the baby faces do come out ahead here. Bill Apter is providing the benefit for the Inspirational Wrestler of the Year, which happens to be, in this case, of all things, Roddy Piper in the turn with Piper. Piper basically says whoever beat him up, he's going to get even. He also says that he cannot fully be, held responsible for the pain that is or was Piper's Palace is what they're talking about, and Humperdinck's Army is what they're talking about, the House of Humperdinck, and so they're kind of putting up a faction war in '83 at the time, which I did not realize the faction wars went into early '80s. I actually thought the Horsemen were the originators of that. Shows my ignorance there. Obviously not the case. Brody and Vinny Valentino is next year. Bruiser Brody comes in, punch kick, drop knee to the midsection. Brody also gets a couple of shots off. Super basic stuff. Nothing necessarily worth writing home about, but at the same time, kind of getting a pretty hard series of hard shots and biting along the way, and basic maneuvers, basic stuff. Needless to say, Bruiser Brody continues hard shots and Irish whips, and ultimately getting where he needs to get in a in a harder way there, and ultimately drop kick under the chin, and Brody kind of there, and he hits the running knee. Brody is intense, and it's rare that you see him in a non-outlaw territory. Needless to say, there is an interview with Rotundo and Valiant. They talk about getting rid of Paul Jones' Army, among other things, and we kind of go into another in the series of matches here. This is Kernoodle and Gilbert. Tommy Gilbert, I think Tommy Gilbert Jr. or Senior, the father of Doug and Eddie Gilbert. And, Kernoodle, one half of the tag team champions, on again, off again. Don Kernoodle is given some ride time, some basic stuff, snaps them over, snap them air, and, basic punch kick. Gilbert coming in, I think, is more a sign of things not going well for him in Memphis or Alabama at the time, more than it is a full commitment to him being a major force in the area. Anyway, tie up by Kernoodle. Kernoodle managing to hang on and ultimately, get things there. And we see Don Kernoodle trying to get every illegal advantage he possibly can, choke out over the bottom rope and basic stuff along the way there. Nothing too intense, but he does go back to some ride times. Gilbert comes up and gets a couple of punches and kicks. Match probably goes longer than it needs to go, just in terms of the pacing of the match, and the fans are not really into things. Also, the cheating is the main part of Kernoodle's offense, as it were. Not anything that anybody needs to really worry about, but a modified sleeper, kind of a chokehold, and a basic series of things. And Kernoodle using a modified choke or the Cobra Clutch, depending on how you look at it, and the baby faces do run out to try and save him. Basically, Kernoodle says that he and Slaughter and others have no competition. Also, Humperdinck wants to run out Valiant, run out Orton, who gets talked about, and Piper and Abdullah and anybody else who's coming into the territory. Humperdinck still wearing a bandage over his over a cut, so he gets brawled with a little bit somewhere on the arena shows at the time, apparently. Anyway, we move to another in the series of matches here. This happens to be a Briscoes versus Dalton and Tim's tag match, which is, I guess you'd say, good enough. Certainly the Briscoes, Jack and Jerry, pretty major talents at the time, and they go arm bars, arm locks, and the like. The World Tag Team Champions several times over. They know how to get the most out of an enhancement match. The idea here is they want to run guys like Greg Valentine and the One Man Gang and various other people out of things, and try to keep things in a pretty aggressive fashion. Head scissors mainly by Jerry Briscoe. Jerry, obviously not as celebrated as his brother Jack. The head scissors then is also placed on by their opponents and kind of get some ride time. Side headlock takeover. Tibbs is in control until he gets taken down into more wrestling hold related type stuff, and a half crab along the way. The Briscoes are the World Tag Team Champions and willing to fight anybody wanting to run Humperdinck and friends out of town wherever they can as quickly as they can. They don't seem to be that enthralled with that tandem by any stretch of the imagination. Then we go into a Masafuchi and Rick Steamboat match here. Steamboat, of course, coming back, and Jay Youngblood back within the last few weeks here. Nice cinch up and martial arts style by Fuchi. Fuchi, of course, becomes a major guy in Japan. I think all Japan at the time during this time period, but has a 6 months to a year in the U.S. to try to get to different territories, learn different styles, which I think more, even now, guys could benefit from in a lot of ways. Deep arm drags by Fuchi, who manages to continue to stay on Steamboat, arm bars, and actually tries to get arm submissions. Holds onto the arm and works the arm for several minutes. Steamboat gives him a competitive match that really isn't as, I guess you'd say, aggressive as one would imagine. But then we go forward with that, and Steamboat talks about wanting Slaughter and Kernoodle to be finished once and for all in 1983 and bringing home the tag team championships. Slaughter and Kernoodle Steamboat and Kernoodle do go face to face with a brawl to close the New Year's Day program here in 1983. We'll be back with more right after this.